Subscribe to Keep It Terrifying for creepy tales, horror, and nightmares you won't forget. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and keep it terrifying. Part 1, The Musician's Solitude. The rain had been coming down in relentless sheets for hours, tapping softly against the window panes of the old house. The mansion sat atop a hill, isolated from the rest of the world by thick woods that swallowed up the sounds of the outside world. Anton had never believed in ghosts or superstitions, but even he couldn't deny the sense of loneliness that clung to the house like cobwebs. It was as though the place itself had been forgotten by time, abandoned and left to rot in silence. Anton, a young but accomplished musician, had chosen this house for its solitude, hoping that the quiet would help him focus on his work. A new album, a new chapter in his life, this was supposed to be the fresh start he needed. But the moment he stepped into the music room, he knew something was off. The room was enormous, far larger than it needed to be for someone living alone. Its high ceiling stretched into shadows that seemed to stretch beyond reach. The walls were lined with faded, dusty portraits of musicians from a forgotten era. At the center of the room stood an imposing grand piano, the black surface glossy and perfect despite the thick dust surrounding it. It was the kind of piano that demanded respect, even though Anton wasn't sure why. The rest of the room was filled with shelves stacked high with sheet music, books, and what appeared to be old instruments, violins, cellos, and even a few wind instruments, all coated in a thin layer of dust. A strange smell hung in the air, something faintly metallic and old. Perhaps it was the dampness of the house or the remnants of decades of neglect. Anton stepped inside, his footsteps soft against the worn hardwood floor. He set down his bag, taking in the room with a sense of awe mixed with unease. The room felt too large, too empty, as if it were waiting for something, or someone. He walked over to the grand piano and ran his fingers across the smooth, black surface. The keys seemed to hum with a strange energy beneath his fingertips, as if the piano itself were alive, beckoning him closer. He hesitated for a moment, then lifted the lid. The piano strings inside were immaculate, untarnished by age, but the air around the instrument seemed to vibrate, a hum that wasn't there before. It was as though something were hiding inside the music, something that had been waiting for the right person to play it. Despite the unsettling sensation, Anton took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. His fingers found their place on the keys almost instinctively. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the soft creak of the house as he began to play. At first, the melody was simple, a familiar scale, a few gentle chords. It was nothing special, just a warm-up to shake off the travel fatigue. But as his fingers moved across the keys, the room seemed to change. The shadows on the walls deepened, and the temperature in the room dropped by a few degrees. Anton's breath came in small clouds, visible in the suddenly chilly air. He paused, fingers hovering over the keys, and scanned the room. No one was there. The house had always been cold. An old structure like this could hardly be expected to keep warmth. But this was different. The cold felt unnatural. There was a sound, just on the edge of hearing, a whisper. Anton's heart skipped. He listened, but the room was silent again. He played on, trying to shake the feeling, but it lingered, a soft tension in the air, like a string pulled too taut. The notes from the piano seemed to echo in a strange way, filling the room but also seeming to drift off into the corners, as if the sound were reaching beyond the walls. For a moment, Anton could have sworn he saw something in the reflection of the darkened window, a shadow moving across the room. He blinked, but the figure was gone. The melody faltered under Anton's fingers. The piano's hum seemed to vibrate a little harder now, like it was trying to pull him into something deeper. The shadows seemed to dance along the walls, moving just beyond the edges of Anton's vision. Suddenly, the piano made a sound, a sharp, discordant note. The sensation of being watched intensified, crawling over Anton's skin like 100 tiny hands. He stopped, his heart racing. The room was still silent, save for the rain outside. But it wasn't just the silence. It was the way the silence pressed in, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Anton stood up from the piano, the echo of his last note hanging in the air. He glanced around the room once more, the cold now settling deep into his bones. A lingering unease washed over him, but he shook it off. It was just his imagination, the stress of moving into a new place, the endless rain outside. Still, as he stepped out of the room, Anton couldn't shake the feeling that the music wasn't done with him. Part 2, The Haunting Melody. The next few days felt like a blur to Anton. The rain didn't stop. It seemed to saturate everything, from the dull gray sky outside to the air inside, thick with an unsettling stillness. Despite the unease that clung to him, Anton tried to focus on his work. He spent hours in the music room each day, working on the pieces for his album. But no matter how hard he tried, the piano kept calling to him, its hum just beneath his consciousness, an insistent whisper in the back of his mind. He'd tried to ignore it at first, dismissing the cold drafts and the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. But there was something about that room, something about the piano, that wouldn't let him go. On the third night, Anton sat at the piano again, attempting to play something, anything, to fill the silence. But no matter what he played, the piano seemed to resist him. The chords didn't ring true, the notes twisted in his mind like broken strings. His fingers were stiff, uncoordinated, as if the music was slipping away from him. Frustrated, Anton stood up and walked away from the piano, running a hand through his hair. He needed a break, needed to clear his mind. But as he turned to leave, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then he heard it again, the softest strains of music, delicate and distant, almost like lullaby. Anton froze, his heart pounding. The music was coming from the piano, but the lid was closed, and he was sure he hadn't touched it. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he moved toward the instrument, his steps echoing in the empty room. He reached for the lid, his breath caught in his throat, and hesitated for a moment before lifting it. The sound stopped immediately. Anton stood there for a long time, staring at the keys, his pulse racing. His mind screamed that it was just his imagination, but his body wouldn't let him leave. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he lowered himself onto the bench again, uncertain whether he should even try to play. Then, his eyes caught something he hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the piano, hidden beneath the brass strings, was a small compartment. Anton's breath caught in his throat as he carefully slid open the compartment, revealing a piece of yellowed paper. It was a single sheet of music, handwritten in an elegant but almost illegible script. The notes on the page were foreign to him, no scales, no recognizable melody. Instead, there were symbols, intricate and delicate, twisting around each other like vines in an unspoken language. Anton felt his pulse quicken as he traced the lines of music with his fingertips. There was something magnetic about it, something that felt wrong, yet irresistible. It was as if the notes were calling to him, urging him to play them. Without thinking, he set the sheet of music on the piano, his fingers reaching for the keys. He had no idea what he was about to play, but as soon as his hands touched the keys, something deep inside him shifted. The first note felt like a shock, sending a chill through his body. The second note resonated in the air like a distant cry. And with each passing bar, the music seemed to weave itself deeper into his mind, pulling him further away from reality. It was as if the room itself was warping around him, the walls bending with the rhythm of the music, the shadows moving in time with the dissonant melody. Anton's fingers danced across the keys, but it wasn't entirely his doing. The music seemed to possess him, to guide his hands, drawing him into a trance-like state. The temperature in the room dropped. Anton's breath came out in visible puffs, but he couldn't stop playing. He didn't want to stop. His chest tightened with each new note, but it felt like the music was the only thing that mattered anymore. It was as though he had become one with the sound. And then, as he played the final, discordant chord, the music abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Anton's hands hovered over the keys, trembling. The room felt too quiet, too still. The hum of the piano had vanished, and for a moment, Anton wondered if he had just dreamed it all. But then he heard it. A whisper. A voice, faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Play it again." Anton's heart stopped. He whipped his head around, expecting to see someone in the room with him. But there was no one. The room was empty. Still. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Play it again. Finish the song." The voice was coming from the piano. Anton's blood ran cold. He stood up, backing away from the instrument. The room felt oppressive, like the air itself was closing in on him. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only an eerie stillness in its wake. His hands shook as he reached for the sheet music again, almost as if he was being compelled to. The melody, that twisted, impossible melody, seemed to rise up from the page, ready to take him again. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing: he wasn't alone in this room anymore. The music, whatever it was, had become part of him. And whatever was behind it wanted something from him. Anton hesitated, his breath shallow, as the whisper echoed in his ears again. "Play it. You must finish what you started." Part 3, The Dark Reflection. Anton couldn't sleep that night. The music from the piano echoed relentlessly in his mind, weaving through every fragment of his thoughts like a haunting lullaby he couldn't escape. The whispers, soft, insistent, replayed in his ears, urging him to play again, to finish the song that had begun to consume him. He found himself drawn back to the music room, even as the first light of dawn began to bleed through the tall, dusty windows. The house was eerily silent, except for the slow creaks and sighs of an aging building settling in the morning chill. Anton entered the room cautiously, feeling the familiar chill brush against his skin as if the shadows themselves were alive. The grand piano waited, its ebony surface gleaming in the weak light like an ancient sentinel guarding secrets no one dared to disturb. The sheet music lay on the stand, yellowed and delicate, beckoning him. His hands trembled as he reached out, the weight of unseen eyes pressing on him. The air thickened, and the edges of the room seemed to blur and ripple, like a heat wave distorting the world. He sat, breath shallow, and began to play. At first, the notes stumbled, hesitant and uneven. But then, his fingers found the flow, as if the music had taken control, pulling him deeper and deeper into its twisted melody. The room changed around him. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the walls, flickering like candle flames in a dying breeze. The portraits of musicians on the walls seemed to watch, their eyes glittering with secrets and sorrow. Then, Anton caught a glimpse, something flickering in the mirror that hung opposite the piano. He froze. The reflection was his own, but it wasn't quite right. The figure in the glass smiled, a cold, hollow smile that didn't reach the eyes. Its fingers moved with unnatural grace over the piano keys, playing the melody flawlessly, a dark mimicry of Anton's clumsy performance. Anton blinked, and the image snapped back to normal, just his reflection staring back at him, wide-eyed and terrified. He shivered, turning away from the mirror, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. It grew heavier, a pressure in his chest like a tightening vice. Night after night, Anton returned to the music room, obsessed with mastering the melody, driven by the whispers and the shadow in the mirror. Each time he played, the reflection grew more distinct, more alive. It no longer mimicked his movements exactly, it began to move independently, its grin widening, its eyes glowing with something unholy. Anton's dreams became invaded by the music, visions of a long-dead composer trapped within the walls, his soul entwined with the cursed notes. The composer's hands, pale and ghostly, seemed to reach out from the mirror, urging Anton to surrender to the music completely. His friends called, worried about his disappearance into the house, his cold demeanor, the dark circles under his eyes. But Anton barely noticed. The music was all that mattered now. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Anton stood before the mirror again, the music pouring from his fingers like a torrent. The shadow in the glass suddenly stepped forward, out of sync with Anton's playing, its smile sinister and triumphant. The room's temperature plummeted, the air crackling with electricity. Anton's heart pounded as he reached for the last notes of the song, knowing that whatever awaited him at the end would change everything. And as the final note echoed through the room, the mirror cracked, splintering like shattered glass, and Anton was left staring into the abyss where his reflection once was. Part 4, The Music's True Power. Anton's hands trembled as he walked away from the broken mirror, the cracks still rippling across its surface like the aftershocks of some terrible event. The room felt heavier now, oppressive, like the very walls were closing in on him, swallowing up the light, leaving only darkness and the echo of that haunting melody. He didn't know how much time had passed since the mirror shattered, his sense of time warped by the music. Days blurred together, each one spent hunched over the piano, playing the same cursed song over and over again, unable to stop. The whispers had grown louder now. At night, they weren't just in the air around him, they were inside his head, as though someone were speaking directly into his mind. The voice was unmistakable, clear now, sharp, insistent. "Play the final note. You must finish it." Anton had no idea what that meant. He didn't know where the song was supposed to end, or if it even had an end. It had become part of him, a constant rhythm in his blood, a pulse beneath his skin. The music had taken over, and nothing else mattered. But one night, something strange happened. The melody, the song he had been playing over and over, began to change. It wasn't the notes this time, no, it was the feeling. The music seemed to shift, as though it were alive, moving and breathing, growing more insistent, more demanding. Anton's hands moved faster, urgently, as if the piano itself were controlling him, pulling him deeper into its depths. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his body tense, every fiber of his being focused on completing what he had started. Then, as he played the final bars, the room seemed to shudder. The walls vibrated, the floor groaning beneath him, and Anton's breath came in ragged gasps. The air grew thick with something darker than the shadows. It was as though something were pressing against him, fighting to break free. The final note hung in the air like a knife poised to fall. But before Anton could finish it, the music cut off abruptly. The piano keys slammed down of their own accord, sending a shock through his body, leaving him gasping for air. The silence that followed was suffocating, pregnant with something ancient and terrible. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The room began to warp, twisting and distorting like the reflection of a funhouse mirror. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, and the shadows on the floor writhed like living things. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of voices that filled his ears. "Finish it, Anton. You must finish what you started." His mind raced. He couldn't stop playing. He couldn't stop, not now. The music was his only escape, the only thing that could make this stop. But the room, the house, was changing. It was alive, pulling him deeper, suffocating him. In a panic, Anton turned and stumbled toward the door. But the door wouldn't open. It was as if the room had become a prison, trapping him inside. The shadows closed in on him, and he felt a cold hand on his shoulder, freezing his skin. He spun around, and for a moment, he thought he saw someone standing in the corner of the room, a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in black. His eyes were hollow, sunken, as if he had been staring into the abyss for too long. The man's face was twisted with pain and desperation. It was the composer. Anton's heart hammered in his chest as the figure reached out toward him, its fingers moving with the same eerie precision as the shadowy reflection in the mirror. "Finish it," the composer's voice rasped, barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You have no choice. You cannot escape." Anton's head swam with confusion and fear. The music, the haunting melody, it was all connected. The man in front of him was not a ghost, but something far worse, a soul trapped within the music, bound by the very song Anton had been playing. He had to know more. He had to understand. Anton's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could help him. His gaze landed on a sheet of music on the piano. The final bars were there, unfinished, as if the music itself were waiting for him to play them. With trembling hands, Anton grabbed the sheet music. As his fingers touched the paper, the room seemed to lurch forward, the walls closing in on him. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and death. The composer's figure reached for him, its outstretched fingers like claws, but Anton could not look away from the music. The final note, it was there. It was so close. He sat down at the piano once more, his mind reeling, but there was no other choice. He had to finish it. Anton began to play the final bars, his fingers moving almost involuntarily. The music seemed to surge through him, dark and powerful, an unstoppable force. As he played, something changed. The room was no longer just a room, it was a gateway. The walls bled shadows, and the air became thick with a rancid stench. The composer's figure reached out again, but this time, it wasn't just the composer, there were others. Dozens of them, their faces twisted in agony, all trapped within the music. All of them had been consumed by the melody. Anton's body moved with the rhythm of the cursed song, each note pulling him deeper into its grip. The music filled his mind, drowning out everything else, until there was nothing left but the sound. And then, as the final note reverberated in the air, Anton's world shattered. The room was no longer the music room. It was something else, something ancient and cold, a void stretching into infinity. Anton felt his body being pulled apart, his very essence torn from him, consumed by the music. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. And then, everything stopped. Part 5, the final note. Anton's consciousness shattered like glass. The world around him flickered, its edges bleeding into something far darker, a void that consumed everything, the room, the walls, the distant echoes of the music. He was weightless, floating in an endless expanse of blackness. There were no sounds, no lights, just an oppressive silence that hung heavily in the air. For a moment, Anton thought he was dead. But then he felt it, the pull. A tug on his very soul, as if something deep within him were being dragged across an invisible chasm. He opened his eyes, but there was nothing to see, no light, no shape, no form. Only shadows, writhing in the emptiness, whispers brushing against his ears like the softest breeze. The melody. It was still there, embedded in his mind, pulsing like a heartbeat, growing louder and louder until it consumed everything. He couldn't escape it. The song, the cursed, twisting song, was now part of him, a part of his very being, and there was no way to remove it. Anton. The voice was faint, but it pierced through the darkness. A voice that was both familiar and foreign, like a memory he couldn't quite grasp. It was the composer, the one who had started this whole nightmare, the one whose soul had been trapped within the music. Anton, the voice came again, this time with more force. You've done it. You've finished it. Anton tried to speak, but no words came. His throat was dry, his chest tight with fear. His mind screamed at him to wake up, to escape, but it was futile. The music was inescapable. It was everything. The composer's presence seemed to grow stronger, his form slowly taking shape in the darkness, a silhouette, tall and thin, his hollow eyes gleaming in the void. The man had once been human, but now he was something else, something consumed by the melody, something that lived only in the sound. Do you hear it? The composer's voice was soft, almost mournful. The song is eternal. It has no end. It is endless, just like us. Anton's breath caught in his throat. Endless? He managed to croak, his voice trembling in the heavy silence. What do you mean? The figure stepped closer, and Anton could feel the weight of its gaze pressing into him. The composer smiled, a cold, hollow smile that sent a shiver through Anton's soul. You've played the last note, Anton. But the song doesn't stop. It never stops. Anton's heart raced as he suddenly understood. He had finished the melody, yes, but finishing it didn't set him free. It didn't end the curse. It only pulled him deeper into it. The composer had been trapped, just like him. Trapped by the very music that had once been his creation, bound by the song that had consumed him, just as it had consumed Anton. Now, Anton was the new keeper, the new prisoner. You're mine now, the composer whispered. You're part of the song. Forever. Anton struggled, his mind clawing for any escape, but the music, it filled every inch of his being. It was in his bones, his blood, his soul. He could feel it, alive, pulsing, waiting for the next soul to come and play. And then it hit him. The truth. Anton realized that the composer had never truly been free. His soul had been trapped in the song for eternity, bound to it as a prisoner of its own creation. He had never escaped. And now, Anton would join him. The music wasn't just a curse, it was a prison. A prison that held the souls of those who played it, those who were consumed by its power, until they became part of the melody, forever trapped within its endless cycle. And Anton had just sealed his fate. The final note had been played. But there was no escape. As the shadows swirled around him, Anton felt his body begin to dissolve, his mind fading as the music took control. His thoughts fragmented, slipping away into the melody, becoming a part of it. His name, his existence, everything he had ever known, was being absorbed by the song. He was losing himself. But even as his sense of self began to vanish, he felt something else. A presence, a figure, watching him from the darkness. The composer, perhaps? Or was it something worse? No. It was his reflection. The one from the mirror. The one he had seen so many times, its hollow smile growing wider with every passing note. Anton's reflection, no longer just a reflection, stepped forward, its eyes glowing with a cold, sinister light. And in that moment, Anton understood. The reflection wasn't just a shadow. It was a part of him. It had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to emerge. It was the part of him that had been drawn to the music, that had succumbed to the whispers, that had allowed the curse to take root. And now, it was taking over. As Anton's body faded completely into the music, the last remnants of his soul, his thoughts, his will, slipped away, absorbed by the melody. But before it was all gone, he saw his reflection one last time, its smile now twisted and triumphant. The final note played, and Anton was lost. Epilogue: The Silent Room. Weeks passed, and the mansion atop the hill sat empty, the rain having long since stopped. But inside the music room, the piano still stood, untouched, its keys covered in a fine layer of dust. But sometimes, in the dead of night, if you listened carefully, you could hear it. The faintest melody, drifting through the house. And if you dared enter the music room, you might catch a glimpse of something, a shadow, a figure, seated at the piano, playing the same cursed song, over and over again. And you might realize, too late, that the music was never truly finished.